I'm Mr. Beats, and I'm here in West Branch, Iowa, in front of the childhood home of President Herbert Hoover. Of all the presidents, he truly had a rags to riches story. I mean, he lived in this home as a kid, you know, a very modest, tiny house for the first 11 years of his life. Both his parents died, and he ended up moving to Oregon with not much money at all, and then grew up to be a very wealthy man once he got involved with mining. So a true rags to riches story. Later, historians called him self-made. Well, I've been thinking a lot about that term lately. In this video, we're going to attempt to answer the question, what does it mean to be self-made?
Napoleon was a self-made man if there ever was one.
He's our first self-made man.
The anti-establishment, self-made Texas billionaire.
A self-made billionaire.
Self-made billionaires are the people that are able to find these positive spirals.
The quintessential self-made man.
A self-made businessman who's very successful in his own right.
Gatsby is the ultimate self-made man.
He worked his way up in the world to become a self-made man.
A self-made man propelling his nation forward.
This most self-made of self-made men.
She was named the youngest self-made woman on Forbes billionaires list.
I guess I find pride because I'm self-made. Nobody gave me what I have.
As it turns out, being self-made is a uniquely American phrase. It was on the Senate floor on February 2nd, 1842 that Henry Clay first coined the phrase self-made man. He was arguing for a protective tariff that he thought would help, quote, enterprising self-made men who have whatever wealth they possess by patient and diligent labor. After that, folks began describing a, quote, self-made man as any person who achieved success independently without any outside help. A few years later, the author Charles Seymour wrote a book called Self-Made Men that told the story of 60 such men. Among the 60 Seymour wrote about was Benjamin Franklin, who eventually became probably the most famous self-made man in American history. And yeah, Franklin apparently did have a true rags to riches story. He was born poor, but worked his butt off and overcame many big obstacles to become one of the wealthiest men in the American colonies. Franklin's story played a big role in inspiring what became known as the American Dream. The American Dream is a phrase that describes the belief that any American, regardless of where they were born or what class they were born into, can achieve prosperity and success due to the supposedly unique American ideals of democracy, liberty, and equal opportunity. But even as early as 1872, folks began to challenge what it meant to be a self-made man. That year, Frederick Douglass, the former slave who escaped and became one of the most important social reformers in American history, gave a powerful speech that later became known as simply Self-Made Men. In it, he said, quote, properly speaking, there are in the world no such men as self-made men. That term implies an individual independence of the past and present which can never exist. Adding, quote, it must in truth be said, though it may not accord well with self-conscious individuality and self-conceit, that no possible native force of character and no depth or wealth of originality can lift a man into absolute independence of his fellow men. And no generation of men can be independent of the preceding generation. Dang, dude. And yet, the self-made man phrase only became more widely said. Hey, wait a second. What about women? Or other gender identities? Oh yeah, it's the 1800s. Well, the same year Frederick Douglass gave his self-made men speech, a person who I would argue could be a self-made woman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, published a book called The Lives and Deeds of Our Self-Made Men, in which she told the story of 19 such men. Notably in the book, she included her brother, the great reformer and minister Henry Ward Beecher, as a self-made man. Well, she didn't include herself in the book. I guess because she wasn't a man, but still, Stowe was much more influential than her brother. Why didn't anyone call her a self-made woman? Huh. Then again, maybe Harriet and Henry weren't so self-made after all, as they came from a fairly privileged family. During the Gilded Age, an era between around 1870 to 1900 that marked rapid industrialization and economic growth, self-made man began to lose its luster as just a handful of super rich dudes controlled all the markets and capital. But it was also during that period that more immigrants arrived in the United States than at any other point in history, and nearly all of them came for economic opportunity. More importantly, they came with hope that they could become prosperous too. After all, some of these super rich dudes in the United States used to be poor. Take Andrew Carnegie, or Carnegie.
Steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, or Carnegie, depending on how pretentious you are.
An immigrant himself that came to the country from Scotland, very poor, only to later become one of the wealthiest men to ever live. These success stories did continue to inspire many Americans, especially immigrants who often came from bleak conditions in their native countries. And then you had gurus. Now, historically and today, there have been different definitions of what a guru is, but essentially, for the context of this video, a guru is someone who gives advice or inspires people, usually by giving speeches. One of the first gurus was Russell Conwell, who is best known today as the founder and first president of Temple University in Philadelphia. However, he also was well known because of his Acres of Diamonds speech, which basically sold the idea that everyone should stop searching the world for diamonds when there were acres of diamonds in their own backyards, and they just needed to stop complaining and start digging, man. He essentially said that anyone could get rich if they just worked hard enough. So how influential was this speech? Well, Conwell delivered it approximately 6,000 times, and it made him quite rich himself. Today, these gurus still exist, and many of them are considered self-made, like this dude, Gary Vaynerchuk, who, as it turns out, got a lot of help starting out from his family. And this guru, Dave Ramsey, who, as it also turns out, likely got a lot of help starting out from his family. There's also gurus like Dan Lok and Ty Lopez, who, well, it's actually really difficult to find any third-party sources about their upbringing. In fact, all that I found out about their childhoods was from them. And they say they had it pretty rough growing up, and their families barely scraped by. One thing is for sure, they definitely want you to think they are self-made. These promoters of being self-made promote themselves as being self-made because it adds to their credibility. Whoa, that was quite a sentence. Let me put this differently. Most of us are not rich, but we want to be rich, so we watch these gurus to become rich and believe them because they used to not be rich.
I'm a self-made guy, started from nothing.
I really hope that makes sense. Anyway, the success of these gurus is proof that many of us still believe in the idea of the self-made person. Here in the United States, we often overestimate our own chances of becoming millionaires. Here's an example of this. When I used to teach economics to high schoolers, I would have them close their eyes and put their heads down on the desk. Not for like any meditation purposes, but so, you know, that they'd be honest with their answers. But then I would tell them, raise your hands if you think that you will one day be a millionaire. And almost every time, at least half of my students raised their hands. But economic mobility, or the ability of people to move up or down the economic ladder in terms of their wealth, has been steadily declining in the United States for decades, especially for people at the bottom of the economic ladder. An American born in 1940 had around a 93% chance of earning more than their parents by the time they were 30 years old. However, an American born in 1980 had just a 45% chance.
Now, Hank, the American dream remains uniquely American in one sense. We are far more likely than residents of other countries to believe that people are rewarded for intelligence and skill, and we're less likely to believe that coming from a wealthy family is key to getting ahead. Unfortunately, like a lot of dreams, what we're dreaming isn't real.
It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it.
Yeah, at the very least, the so-called American dream is in trouble. And perhaps more and more Americans are starting to realize that the self-made person idea might be just a dream as well. In one 2020 Pew Research poll, 65% of respondents said a person is rich not because they worked harder, but because they had more advantages in life than most other people. Seeing that poll inspired me to ask my friends and colleagues what they thought self-made meant.
For me, being self-made, it just means that you've sort of achieved everything in your life on your own. Specifically, I guess I would say that you haven't received much help from your parents or your family or the government or anything like that. You know, you basically started from scratch and worked your way to the top.
Whether or not it's a real thing, it really is the ultimate assertion of human agency. It ignores things like environmental factors or pre-existing infrastructure and says, I, as a human, used my agency to create my own success, presumably without help.
It means you've got your position in society without inheriting it from your mum and dad, either like financially or through connections. But it's hard to quantify, isn't it? No man is an island. Everyone gets help from someone.
You know, I think we all get help along the way, but there are some people who just work harder, who give more, who put in the time, the effort, the hours, who rise above, who overcome difficulties and challenges. Those, to me, are the people who are self-made.
Less than 3 years ago, that's how I looked like. I was about 450 pounds. I was very depressed, very sad, didn't like how I looked at all. And now, less than 3 years later, I'm me. In the end. Path I never thought I'd end up taking, never thought I'd transition to be a woman, but in the end, being your proper self is what it means to be self-made.
A self-made person does not rely on excuses and blaming other people for his or her condition, but makes proactive steps to control his or her own destiny, at least to the extent possible.
Whenever I hear someone tell me that they're self-made, quote unquote, what I hear is someone who is unable to acknowledge all of the help they've had in getting to where they are, and all of the community resources and the labor of other people that's gone into getting them where they are.
I also asked Twitter, and here are some responses I got. Starting from relatively modest means and becoming fabulously successful beyond what anyone would expect, using one's own skills, and no more than the expected amount of help from others. This is vague, though. Anyone who makes a future for themselves, but those who are truly self-made are anyone who follows their dream unrelentingly. I think it means you earned everything you got and nothing was handed to you. But most of the responses, to be honest, were much more cynical. It's impossible. Everyone gets help at some point. Could be friends, family, or even employees and business partners. An increasingly meaningless term, the more I think about it. It usually means they were born into privilege and/or they inherited money, but like to tell everyone that they earned it on their own. And aha! My hypothesis was correct! Oh, I never told you my hypothesis. Well, I predicted that most of them would give different definitions of self-made. I also recently came across this thought-provoking video by Veritasium called Is Success Luck or Hard Work? Well, let me spoil it for you and answer the question. It's mostly luck. But you should still watch the video. Some of you might be wondering at this point in the video if I, Mr. Beat, ever inherited wealth. Am I a trust fund baby? Or did I build this somewhat successful YouTube channel from the ground up? Am I self-made? And the answer is no, I am not. But not because I inherited money from relatives. In fact, assets are sparse in my family, if you know what I mean. But that doesn't mean I didn't get any support growing up. I got a lot of support. You see, success isn't aided just by money. First of all, I was lucky to be born in the United States. Second, I was lucky to be born into a loving family. My parents took good care of me and raised me in an environment in which I could thrive. I lived in a safe area and I went to great schools. I had the opportunity to go to college and I made some great friends who have always been supportive. I married an incredibly supportive woman. Later on, after I did post videos on YouTube, the algorithms eventually promoted my videos to a broader audience for free. Without a lot of help from others, I simply would not be here today. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that Herbert Hoover ended up moving to Oregon after his parents died when he was a kid. Well, he moved there to be raised by his uncle John Minthorn. Minthorn was much more privileged than Hoover's parents were, and Hoover enjoyed a much more comfortable life in Oregon. In fact, it was his uncle and his uncle's family who gave him many educational and training opportunities that later paved the way for Hoover's success, including going to Stanford. As it turns out, maybe Hoover wasn't self-made after all. I think Arnold puts it best.
There's no such thing as a self-made man. I mean, when you think about it, you're born and you need your parents to raise you. You need your teachers to teach you. You need your coaches to do sports. I remember that everything I did always needed help. Think about it when someone says, Arnold, you're the greatest self-made man. I said, you can call me anything you want. You can call me Arnie, you can call me Schwarzi, you can call me Terminator, you can call me Governator, but don't ever call me self-made man.
Don't ever call me a self-made man either. In fact, after making this video, I've decided I'm never calling anyone self-made again. So there. Hey, a shout out to all my friends and colleagues who gave me their definitions of self-made. Subscribe to their channels, check out their music. So what do you think the definition of self-made is? Should we stop using the phrase? I'd love to hear from you in the comment things below. You can just type some words, maybe even some sentences, maybe even some paragraphs or essays. Thank you for watching.